A weapon was aimed squarely at my daughter's head. When a voice yelled, "Don't move," a chill ran through my entire being. The individual with the gun wasn't a burglar or a thug. He was the HOA security guard from our very own neighborhood. His justification? My daughter appeared suspicious while coming back to her own house at 10 p.m. What this man was unaware of was that my daughter is an FBI tactical commander who, for the last 5 years, has orchestrated some of the nation's most perilous raids. From that point on, the situation only deteriorated. I'd like to share the story of how a self-important HOA security guard sealed his own fate by provoking the wrong family. My name is Michael Johnson. I'm a 58-year-old retired diplomatic officer, having dedicated 3 decades to navigating the intricate political environments of foreign nations. I believed I had witnessed everything until I relocated to Lakeside Pines, a high-end gated community in Connecticut that advertised tranquility, safety, and opulent living. What the glossy marketing materials failed to mention was the authoritarian regime that operated under the guise of a homeowners association. My wife had passed away 5 years prior, and following my years overseas, I sought to find a beautiful and peaceful place to settle down. With its immaculate lawns, shimmering lake, and robust security, Lakeside Pines appeared to be the ideal choice. I had no inkling that this same robust security would soon turn into a nightmare for my family. My daughter, Amy, is 26 and, unlike her diplomat father, opted for a more action-focused career. After graduating at the top of her class from Quantico, she ascended through the FBI's ranks with astonishing swiftness, ultimately achieving the position of tactical commander with a focus on high-stakes operations and financial crimes. I am immensely proud of her achievements, although the secret nature of her duties means I see her infrequently. When she telephoned to inform me she would be home for a few weeks of rest and relaxation after finishing a 2-year international counterterrorism mission, I was overjoyed. We had only resided in Lakeside Pines for 3 months, and I was excited to introduce her to our new residents. The Homeowners Association at Lakeside Pines was governed with an iron will by Robert Thompson, a 58-year-old retired corporate leader with a significant ego and a trophy wife, Sarah, who regarded the community as her private fiefdom. From the moment I arrived, I clashed with their over-the-top regulations. These rules dictated everything from the precise hue of white allowed for window coverings to the designated day for watering one's lawn. However, the true enforcer of these minor despotisms was Curtis Wilson, a 42-year-old former policeman who had been discharged from the service due to excessive use of force. Serving now as the head of security for our HOA, he roamed our streets like a petty tyrant, accompanied by his team of 4 similarly disagreeable guards. The incident occurred on a Friday evening in July. Amy's flight was delayed, and she didn't get to Lakeside Pines until approximately 10 p.m. I had provided her with a key and the gate code, but I had neglected to notify security of her arrival, a minor lapse that should have been simple to address. As I sat waiting in the living room, I perceived loud voices outside. Upon opening the front door, I was paralyzed by the scene before me. Curtis Wilson had his weapon drawn, pointing it directly at my daughter's face, while his colleague Jason stood close by, his hand resting on his holstered firearm. "I don't give a damn what identification you're presenting. You lack resident clearance," Curtis was yelling at Amy, who stayed completely composed even with a gun aimed at her. "Lie on the ground immediately, or I will classify you as a threat." The harsh shadows cast by the porch light illuminated the scene, and I could see neighbors' curtains moving as they peered out at the disturbance. Amy remained perfectly still with her hands in view, her expression set in a way that only someone with years of experience facing true peril could learn. She had immediately identified Curtis's weapon as a Glock 19 and was almost certain he lacked the correct license to carry it as a private security officer. "Curtis, what in God's name are you doing?" I yelled, moving quickly toward them. "That is my daughter." I took a step to place myself between them, but Amy made a subtle adjustment to her position, preventing me from stepping into the line of fire. Curtis did not lower his weapon right away, his face red with the excitement of his authority. "Your daughter should have registered with security," he sneered, finally holstering the gun after what felt like an eternity. "We have procedures here, Mr. Johnson. There are no exceptions, not even for FBI agents. If that's what she even is." Amy stayed quiet, observing Curtis with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was committing every detail to memory for future reference. Only after the firearm was fully put away did she speak, her voice calm and exact. "Mr. Wilson, I suggest you be informed that aiming a firearm at a federal officer without justification is a felony. Furthermore, I doubt you possess the required licensing to carry that weapon as a security guard in this state. The color vanished from Curtis's face, but his arrogance soon resurfaced. This is private property. The rules are different here, he stated, though his conviction was noticeably weaker. I will be reporting this event to Mr. Thompson. You can expect to hear from the HOA board. As they departed, I could hear Jason speaking urgently to Curtis, clearly troubled by the events that had just unfolded. I guided Amy inside and shut the door, my hands trembling with a mix of fury and leftover fear. I am so sorry about that, my dear. This community has strict security, but that was utterly inexcusable. Amy calmly set her luggage down and gave me a comforting hug. It's fine, Dad. I've been in worse situations, but I believe we require a long-term plan for handling these individuals. That man is a danger, not due to any skill, but because of his insecurity combined with being armed. That's never a good mix. Later that night, as we sat in the kitchen, we caught up over cups of tea that went cold while we talked. Amy posed specific questions regarding the HOA, its functions, and especially about Curtis Wilson. Her analytical mind was already in motion, forging connections I had not even perceived. You know, she commented thoughtfully, the most compelling cases sometimes aren't the major terrorist conspiracies or bank robberies. Occasionally, it's the small-town despots misusing their little domains that require the most scrutiny. I chuckled at her remark, feeling relieved to have my competent daughter back home, but I had no inkling of how prescient her words would turn out to be. The following morning brought the anticipated knock at our door. Robert Thompson stood there in crisply pressed khakis and a polo shirt adorned with the Lakeside Pines emblem. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his expression was one of feigned concern that hid his clear contempt. His wife, Sarah, stood behind him, attired as if for a country club luncheon rather than a neighborhood dispute. In his manicured hand, Robert clutched a formal letter of warning. Mr. Johnson, he began, without waiting for an invitation to enter. We must address last night's regrettable incident. His voice had the synthetic warmth of someone who had attended too many executive communication workshops. Regrettable incident, I echoed, my diplomatic training clashing with my paternal desire to tell him precisely where he could put his letter. Your security guard aimed a loaded firearm at my daughter's head for the offense of arriving home after sundown. There is nothing regrettable about it. It was both illegal and perilous. Robert's smile remained fixed, though his eyes grew colder. Our security team was merely adhering to protocol. If you had correctly registered your guest. I interrupted him, a thing I seldom did in my diplomatic past. My daughter is not a guest. She is my family visiting her own home. And no protocol warrants drawing a weapon on an unarmed individual who is presenting identification. Amy materialized at my side, dressed in casual attire but carrying an alertness that seemed ever-present. She put a soothing hand on my arm before speaking directly to Robert. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate the necessity for security procedures. However, I would be curious to learn if all your security staff are properly licensed for armed duties in this state. I observed some irregularities last night that gave me pause. Her tone was businesslike, almost amicable, yet I saw the subtle interrogation method at play. Robert's smile faltered for a second before he regained his composure. All of our personnel meet the most rigorous standards, Miss Johnson. Now, if you would kindly accept this official warning, we can move past this issue. He extended the envelope, which neither of us made a move to accept. I don't believe we'll be accepting that, Amy stated pleasantly. But I do appreciate you coming by. She closed the door gently but decisively, leaving a stunned Robert and Sarah on our porch. Through the window, I observed them walking away, Sarah's expressive gestures indicating she was already crafting a version of this event for maximum neighborhood gossip. That was gratifying, I conceded, but likely not very strategic. Amy smiled, a hint of resolve in her eyes. Oh, I'm not so sure. Sometimes you have to set firm boundaries before negotiations can start. And believe me, Dad, we are now in a negotiation, whether they know it or not. Later that day, we were introduced to Linda Peterson, a 65-year-old retired schoolteacher residing 3 houses away. She brought a welcome pie, explaining it was belated because she had been away visiting her grandchildren. During our talk, it became apparent that Linda was part of a quiet group within Lakeside Pines, residents who resented the Thompson administration but did not have the clout or bravery to oppose it. Robert and Sarah have managed this community like their personal fiefdom for 5 years, she shared as we sat on the patio. Anyone who challenges them gets buried in violation notices or shut out of community functions. Most residents just settle the absurd fines and try to stay out of trouble. Amy listened closely, making occasional inquiries that appeared casual but were clearly constructing a detailed understanding of the community's power structure. Over the subsequent days, Amy dedicated herself to analyzing the HOA bylaws, identifying numerous clauses that were legally questionable. At the same time, Curtis started parking his security car across from our home for long stretches, a clear intimidation move that would have been effective on someone who had not confronted actual terrorists. I saw other shifts as well. Neighbors who were once friendly now seemed distant, and Linda informed us that Sarah was organizing a ladies' tea to which I, the community's only single father, was pointedly not invited. Amy devoted hours to her laptop, sometimes making quiet phone calls from the seclusion of her room. When I inquired about her research, she revealed a troubling pattern. Curtis Wilson had been forced out of the police force following numerous complaints of excessive force, and Robert had personally stepped in to secure his hiring at Lakeside Pines, despite his problematic background. More alarmingly, the security firm officially hired by the HOA seemed to be compensating Curtis at a rate significantly higher than the norm for his role. "Something isn't right with the finances here," Amy said softly, scrolling through public records she had somehow gained access to. The HOA fees in this community are some of the steepest in the state, yet the services provided don't justify the costs. The undeclared conflict intensified when Amy ran into Sarah Thompson at the local supermarket. I was not there, but Amy described how Sarah had accidentally pushed her shopping cart into Amy's, all while feigning not to notice her. "Oh, it's the FBI agent," Sarah had declared loud enough for other shoppers to overhear. "I trust you're not investigating our little grocery store. We're all law-abiding folks here, apart from those who disregard the rules." Amy had merely smiled and answered, "Actually, financial crimes are one of my areas of expertise. It's remarkable what people believe they can conceal in broad daylight." Sarah had turned pale before quickly moving away. But not before a woman in a professional pantsuit observed the entire interaction with clear interest. That woman happened to be Jessica Miller, a 40-year-old lawyer who was on the HOA board but had become increasingly uneasy with Robert's style of leadership. She came up to Amy in the parking lot, introduced herself, and proposed they meet for coffee. "There are things going on in Lakeside Pines that don't make sense," Jessica had shared with her. "Financial inconsistencies, questionable contracts, biased enforcement of rules. A few of us have been collecting proof, but we need someone who understands how to use it strategically." As Amy recounted this exchange to me later that evening, her eyes shone with a look I knew from her childhood, the one that surfaced whenever she faced a puzzle that matched her abilities. "Sometimes, Dad," she remarked pensively, "you have to let your adversaries believe they are winning before you can flip the script." A week later, the yearly HOA meeting offered the ideal stage to witness the Thompson regime in its full display. The community center was set up like a small fiefdom, with Robert and Sarah at a raised table in the front, accompanied by Curtis and the HOA treasurer, David Clark, a 45-year-old accountant who nodded in agreement with everything Robert said. We were intentionally given seats in the last row, a petty display of power that made me smile as I realized it gave Amy a perfect view to watch everyone without being observed herself. She had used the past days to build connections with several residents who, like Jessica, held quiet grudges against the current leadership. She had also made contact with an old acquaintance from the FBI Academy, Officer James Rodriguez, who was now at the local police. The meeting began as expected. Robert delivered a self-praising speech about property values and community regulations. Sarah announced future social gatherings to which I assumed we would not be invited. And David offered a financial overview so ambiguous it could have applied to any organization's finances. When the floor was open for questions, I put up my hand, relying on my years of experience examining diplomatic budgets. I observed that the security costs have risen by 30% since last year, but there is no detailed breakdown of these expenses. Could you please provide one? The room fell silent. It seemed that detailed inquiries were not a standard part of the proceedings. Robert's smile became strained. "Security is our highest priority at Lakeside Pines, Mr. Johnson. The board has reviewed and sanctioned all expenditures." I continued politely, "I realize that. But as residents who pay these higher fees, don't we have a right to understand precisely what we are paying for?" David nervously went through his documents while Robert's face turned red. The detailed financial records are accessible only to board members for security purposes. He tried to proceed, saying if there are no further questions. But Jessica unexpectedly chimed in. Actually, I am on the board, and I don't remember seeing the detailed security expenses either. A ripple of conversation went through the room as Robert gave Jessica a look of pure hatred. Curtis moved forward, placing himself near me in a clear intimidation tactic. The tension in the room was intense as Robert suddenly shifted topics, speeding through the rest of the agenda before announcing the meeting was over. As attendees began to leave, Sarah Thompson went straight to Jessica, starting what looked like a heated argument near the refreshment table. At the same time, Curtis and another security guard took up positions by the exit, observing us with open animosity. "Let them make their next move," Amy whispered as we headed to our car. "They're shaken, which means they'll get careless." And indeed, as we tried to exit the parking lot, a security vehicle abruptly blocked our way. Curtis came to my window, a smug look on his face. "Sir, your vehicle is violating HOA parking rules. The angle is more than the allowed 15 degrees from the curb." The harassment was so obvious that I almost chuckled. But Amy put a restraining hand on my arm. "Officer Wilson," she said calmly from the passenger seat, "I think you are incorrect, but more significantly, you are obstructing the exit of a vehicle, which is a traffic offense." She took out her phone and made a call, her gaze fixed on Curtis. "Officer Rodriguez?" "Yes, it's Amy Johnson. I'm at the Lakeside Pines Community Center, and we're experiencing an issue with security staff blocking our car and making baseless claims about violations. Could you dispatch someone?" The change in Curtis's attitude was immediate. His face grew pale as he saw that Amy was not bluffing about her connections. "There seems to have been a mistake," he stammered, motioning for his partner to move the security vehicle. As we departed, I saw Robert and Sarah watching from the community center steps in my rearview mirror, their faces showing a mix of anger and, for the first time, doubt. "That's not going to win us any friends among the neighbors," I remarked as we headed down our street. Amy's reply was measured. "We don't need their affection, Dad. We need their respect. And sometimes, respect is only earned after you demonstrate your strength." Back at our house, Amy shared more of her findings. "Curtis isn't merely a bad former officer with an attitude. He's a sign of a bigger problem. With Jessica's assistance, I've been examining the HOA's finances, and there are significant inconsistencies. For starters, the security company that supposedly hires Curtis and his crew is registered to Robert's brother-in-law and bills premium prices for subpar service. She presented a folder filled with financial reports from the past 5 years. And that's only the beginning. These records show over $300,000 that is unaccounted for, money supposedly used for infrastructure projects that nobody can actually identify. I examined the documents, my diplomatic background making the patterns obvious. "This appears to be a typical embezzlement operation," I noted, impressed despite the gravity of the situation. "But why take such risks for what are relatively minor sums? Robert doesn't appear to be in financial trouble." Amy gave a grim smile. "It's seldom about necessity, Dad. It's about a sense of entitlement. Individuals like Robert and Sarah think the rules don't apply to them. The money is almost an afterthought to the exercise of power." She pointed to another document showing property deeds. "Did you know Robert possesses 3 investment properties in this community through shell corporations? Properties that, strangely, never get violation notices despite obvious infractions." While we were weighing our options, Amy's phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow. R is trying to push through new bylaw changes. We need to speak." Amy showed me the text, her face becoming determined. "They are speeding up their schedule, which means we must speed up ours. I believe it's time to call in some professional assistance." She made a call, using the concise, effective language I associated with her work. "Marcus, it's Amy. I require a consultation on a financial analysis. It's a civilian issue, but it's urgent. Can you be in Connecticut tomorrow?" "Excellent. I'll send the address." After she hung up, she clarified that Special Agent Marcus Reed was one of the FBI's foremost financial crime experts. "He's in between assignments and owes me one. With his help, we can confirm what I'm seeing in these records and construct a strong case." I arched an eyebrow. "A case?" "Amy, this is a neighborhood quarrel, not a federal matter." Her expression was grave as she answered, "Dad, when individuals in authority misuse that authority and possibly engage in financial crimes, it is precisely the kind of situation that requires a proper investigation. And besides," she added with a small grin, "no one points a gun at me and walks away." The Thompsons' reaction was swift and just as we had anticipated. The following day, we found 5 different HOA violation notices, each one more absurd than the one before. Our trash bin was apparently 2 inches out of place. The hue of our porch light was deemed excessively warm. The American flag I had displayed was not properly lit after dark. The petty campaign of harassment persisted all week. Curtis, or one of his team, would park across from our house for hours, taking pictures of supposed violations. When I tried to use the community pool, I was told that my access had been temporarily revoked pending a review of the outstanding infractions. Several neighbors who had been cordial now went out of their way to avoid us, evidently warned against associating with the Johnson family. Through it all, Amy stayed remarkably calm, almost finding it humorous. Standard intimidation methods, she noted as we gathered the day's mail, which included 2 more violation notices. They're attempting to make us so uncomfortable that we either give in or leave. Unfortunately for them, they chose the wrong people. Indeed, instead of feeling threatened, I grew more resolute with every minor assault. In my diplomatic life, I had confronted real dictators and conducted negotiations amid active conflicts. Robert Thompson's suburban despotism was child's play in comparison. Amy's colleague, Marcus Reed, showed up as scheduled, a straightforward 40-year-old with the meticulousness of an accountant and the intuition of a detective. He spent 2 days examining the financial papers Jessica had supplied, sometimes letting out a soft whistle at especially blatant inconsistencies. If these documents are genuine, he informed us while working at our dining table, you are dealing with multiple breaches of financial laws. The security contract alone is a classic case of self-dealing, and the pattern of infrastructure projects with no actual work done strongly points to embezzlement. In the meantime, Amy had set up security cameras around our home. These were not the conspicuous type that would give Robert a reason for another violation notice, but rather sophisticated, almost undetectable devices that recorded around the clock, just keeping a record of everything. She clarified when I questioned the setup. Building a case takes evidence. Her preparation proved its worth when, 3 days after the HOA meeting, the cameras recorded Curtis and 2 other security guards carrying out an unapproved inspection of our yard at 3 a.m., using flashlights to measure the length of our grass and taking pictures of our property. The situation worsened when Linda Peterson appeared at our door in tears. Sarah Thompson had accosted her at the community center, threatening to get her grandchildren barred from visiting if she maintained her friendship with us. I am so sorry, Linda repeatedly said, but my grandkids are everything to me since my husband died. I can't take the chance of not seeing them. Amy comforted her with a surprising gentleness. You have no reason to apologize, Linda. People like the Thompsons prey on these kinds of vulnerabilities, but I assure you, they will not hold power for much longer. That evening, we noticed strange movements at the Thompson house. David Clark showed up after sunset with file folders, and 30 minutes later, Curtis arrived. Their discussion went on for more than 2 hours, with all 3 men visible through the window, making animated gestures. They're starting to panic, Amy noted as we observed from our unlit living room. Jessica's questions at the meeting unsettled them, and now they're scrambling to hide their activities. She picked up her phone, sent a few text messages, and then looked at me with a resolute expression. It's time to begin the next stage. The next morning delivered the showdown Curtis had clearly been working towards. He showed up at our door with 2 security guards, all 3 of them looking grimly pleased. Mandatory security check, he declared, trying to force his way past me into the house. I stood my ground in the doorway, feeling a surge of anger I seldom let myself show. You have no legal right to come into my home without my consent or a warrant, I said firmly. Curtis grinned, displaying a sheet of paper. HOA Bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 3. Security staff can perform inspections of any property if there is a reasonable suspicion of bylaw breaches. We have recorded 27 breaches in the last week alone. Amy stepped up beside me, her phone clearly capturing the scene. That bylaw provision is in direct violation of state law concerning private property rights, she told him calmly. And speaking of records, would you care to justify why you were in our yard at 3 a.m. 2 nights ago? Curtis's expression faltered for a moment before it hardened into open animosity. You are obstructing HOA security procedures. This will have consequences. As they left, I saw one of the guards look back anxiously, clearly ill at ease with the escalating conflict. That night, our security cameras filmed Curtis and the same nervous guard coming back after midnight. This time, their behavior went beyond simple harassment. They intentionally wrecked our garden, pulling up plants and spray painting a vulgar message on our fence. When I viewed the recording the next morning, I was furious and ready to confront them immediately. But Amy placed a calming hand on my arm. "This is precisely what we need," she stated, her voice steady but her eyes shining with resolve. "They're getting desperate and making errors. Each mistake makes our position stronger." She made a phone call, using the concise, professional tone I recognized from her work. "It's time," she said plainly. "We require backup for the next phase." After she hung up, she turned to me with a confident grin. "Dad, you always taught me that in diplomacy, timing is key, right? Well, I believe it's time to teach these neighborhood bullies what happens when they confuse patience with weakness." The weekend brought an unforeseen development. A crowd of neighbors gathered on our lawn, tools in hand, prepared to help restore the damage to our garden. Jessica Miller had coordinated the effort, uniting residents who had experienced similar mistreatment but had been too afraid to challenge it before. As they worked, stories emerged: biased enforcement of rules, dubious fines, and social exclusion planned by Sarah for anyone who challenged Robert's authority. With every story shared, the group's shared determination grew. What started as a simple garden cleanup was evolving into something more significant: a community rediscovering its collective strength. Among the helpers was Marcus Reed, who identified himself merely as Amy's associate, not mentioning his FBI role. His presence was beneficial when Curtis drove past slowly, obviously noting who was associating with us. "Is that the security guard you mentioned?" Marcus inquired quietly, his experienced eye observing Curtis's confrontational stance and the shape under his jacket that hinted at a weapon. When Amy confirmed, Marcus stepped away to make a phone call. 20 minutes later, Officer James Rodriguez conveniently arrived in his patrol car, his appearance causing Curtis to quickly depart. Inside the house, shielded from prying ears, James revealed what he had learned about Curtis Wilson. "His personnel file is a disaster, Amy. Numerous complaints of excessive force, 2 questionable shootings that were deemed justified under dubious conditions, and a domestic violence report that strangely vanished from the system. He was discreetly let go from the force with a non-committal recommendation, which led him here." He paused before adding, "There's something else. He lacks a current license to carry a concealed firearm as a private security officer. The one he presented to you expired last year and was not renewed because of issues with his psychological assessment." While the community activity outside was the public display of our growing alliance, the real progress was being made inside, where Amy, Marcus, Jessica, and James were compiling a detailed case against the Thompson administration. Jessica had been discreetly duplicating HOA financial documents for months, noting inconsistencies between claimed expenses and the actual services rendered. Marcus had mapped out the network of shell companies that linked Robert to different suppliers who were getting overly generous contracts. James had obtained police records that demonstrated a history of biased law enforcement at Curtis's behest. Citations were issued to Thompson's opponents while infractions by his supporters were overlooked. "A security firm that allegedly employs Curtis and his crew," Marcus clarified, indicating a detailed flowchart on my dining table. "It's registered to Sarah's brother, runs from a virtual office, and has no clients other than Lakeside Pines. They have been paid over $150,000 a year for the last 3 years, but their tax records show they only distribute about $60,000 in total salaries. The remainder simply vanishes into offshore bank accounts." Jessica nodded with a grim expression. "And that's just one case. The landscaping agreement, the road upkeep, the community center upgrades, they all exhibit the same pattern. Companies connected to Robert get inflated contracts, do very little work, and the extra money disappears." As our supporters departed that evening, with the garden restored and our alliance solidified, Linda stayed behind. "I've been considering what you said, Amy," she remarked, her voice more resolute than I had ever heard it. "They can't legally prevent my grandchildren from visiting. That's not even in the bylaws. I've been allowing fear to dictate my actions, and I'm through with it." Amy smiled warmly. "That's precisely it, Linda. Their authority is only real because people accept it." She let the thought hang in the air, but we all grasped the meaning. The Thompson administration was founded on intimidation and the illusion of authority, not on legitimate power, and illusions could be shattered. The following day brought an unexpected turn of events. Robert and Sarah Thompson showed up at our door, their faces set in unconvincing smiles. "Michael, we believe this matter has spiraled out of control," Robert started, his tone artificially conciliatory. "We would like to suggest a way to resolve this." He offered a document labeled Mutual Non-Disclosure and Non-Litigation Agreement. Sarah chimed in enthusiastically, "We are all neighbors, after all. There is no reason for this unpleasantness to persist." I welcomed them inside with diplomatic politeness, noticing how Sarah's eyes scanned our living room, as if searching for something she could report as a violation. Amy scanned the document with a lawyer's keen eye, occasionally arching an eyebrow at some of the more audacious sections. "This is quite interesting," she remarked at last. "In short, you are proposing to cease issuing violation notices in exchange for our agreement never to challenge HOA financial matters or initiate any legal action against the association or its board members." She placed the document on the table, her face pleasantly unreadable. "Might I inquire what led to this abrupt interest in finding a solution?" Robert looked uneasy. "As Sarah mentioned, we are all neighbors. The community operates most effectively when everyone cooperates in a harmonious manner." "Harmoniously under your authority, you mean?" I clarified, which earned me a cautionary look from Amy, who was clearly pursuing a more strategic approach. Sarah's manufactured smile hardened. "We have been extremely patient during your settling-in period, Mr. Johnson. Not everyone is suited for community life. Perhaps if you consider our regulations too constraining." Amy cut in smoothly. "What my father is trying to say is that harmony depends on transparency and justice. This document provides neither." She returned the paper to Robert. "I'm sorry, but we must refuse your offer." Robert's veneer of politeness cracked for a moment, exposing the rage underneath. "You are making a grave error. There are repercussions for challenging the HOA leadership." As they headed for the door, Amy called out to them, her voice intentionally offhand. "Oh, Robert, just for your information, this entire exchange has been recorded. Making threats against homeowners for using their legal rights could be seen as harassment under state law." The doors shut on their shocked faces, and I looked at Amy with a new admiration for her strategic thinking. "What's our plan now?" I inquired. Her smile was both self-assured and a bit playful. "A press conference, Dad. And you, with your diplomatic background and inherent seriousness, will be the ideal spokesperson." The emergency HOA meeting initiated by Robert was clearly designed to railroad through new bylaws that would cement his authority and simplify the process of ousting troublesome residents. The community center was filled to capacity, with a tension in the atmosphere like an impending thunderstorm. Robert was seated at the front table, with Sarah, David, and Curtis by his side, their faces a mix of resolve and poorly hidden nervousness. They had good reason to be worried. Amy had carried out her strategy with military-like precision, making sure that Officer Rodriguez, Agent Marcus Reed, and a journalist from the local paper were all in attendance, strategically placed around the room. Robert brought the meeting to order, his usual polished confidence visibly shaken. "Before we get to the proposed bylaw changes, I want to stress the value of community unity. Lakeside Pines has always taken pride in upholding exceptional standards, which raises everyone's property values. Regrettably, some recent arrivals appear to be resisting these standards, causing needless friction." His eyes were fixed directly on me, but I just gave him a pleasant smile, my years of maintaining a diplomatic poker face proving useful. When he concluded his thinly disguised jab and turned to the first proposed change, which would give security staff unlimited access to all properties, I raised my hand. "A point of order," I announced, rising as Robert reluctantly gave me the floor. "Before we decide on giving the board new powers, I think the residents should be fully aware of how the existing powers have been used." A wave of interest went through the room as I walked to the front, placing a folder on the table. As a resident who values transparency, I have examined the HOA financial records, which ought to be accessible to all members but have been strangely hard to obtain. Robert tried to cut me off, but Jessica immediately supported my right to speak, quoting the very bylaws Robert had previously used to silence dissent. What came next was the most gratifying 30 minutes of my life since retiring from diplomacy. Using the skills I had perfected in international forums, I systematically laid out the proof that Amy and our allies had compiled. The security firm that gets $150,000 of our HOA funds each year is owned by Sarah Thompson's brother and hires guards without the necessary licenses, including Mr. Wilson, who has been recorded threatening residents with an illegally possessed firearm. Curtis fidgeted as everyone's attention shifted to him. I went on. The landscaping contract was given to a company registered to Robert's old college friend at a price 60% higher than the market rate, with very little actual work being done. As I talked, Jessica passed out packets with financial statements, email correspondence, and photos that proved the systematic misconduct. Robert's face turned red with rage, while Sarah whispered angrily to David, who was starting to look physically unwell. Perhaps most troubling, I continued, is that more than $300,000 raised for infrastructure upgrades over the last 3 years cannot be traced to any verifiable projects. I am confident the residents would like an explanation before giving any more authority to the current board. Curtis started moving towards me with a menacing stance, but Officer Rodriguez smoothly stepped in, engaging him in a quiet but clearly firm discussion. Robert stood up suddenly, his voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. These claims are utterly unfounded and could be considered slander. This meeting is now over. His effort to end the conversation backfired dramatically as numerous residents stood up to protest, demanding clarification on the issues I had raised. The financial documents are self-explanatory, I responded calmly. If there are valid reasons for these inconsistencies, I am sure we would all be greatly relieved to hear them. The situation quickly fell apart for the Thompson administration when David, looking increasingly distressed, blurted out, "I only handled the documents Robert provided. I was unaware of the shell companies." Sarah let out a horrified gasp at this confession, while Robert tried to physically drag David away from the microphone. The journalist was writing frantically, and Marcus Reed had taken a position near the exit, anticipating the next move. Robert, seeing his authority crumble, shifted his approach. "This is a private HOA issue that is being exaggerated. Mr. Johnson clearly has a personal grudge after his daughter was rightfully questioned by security." Amy, who had intentionally stayed in the background until now, came forward, her face professionally neutral but her eyes sharp. "I believe the residents should see for themselves what rightful questioning looks like in Lakeside Pines." She linked her phone to the projector, and suddenly the room was filled with the security camera video of Curtis aiming his gun at her face, followed by more footage of Curtis and his crew damaging our property in the dead of night. The audible gasps from the residents were unmistakable, as was Sarah's cry of despair. What transpired next happened so fast that many people later claimed they couldn't keep track of the sequence of events. Curtis, driven past his limited self-restraint by the public revelation of his actions, charged towards me with a furious shout. His hand reached for his hidden weapon, and several people screamed in warning. Before anyone could intervene, Amy acted with the smooth efficiency of her tactical training, stopping Curtis and disarming him with a series of moves so skilled they seemed almost effortless. 1 second, Curtis was rushing forward with violent intent. The next, he was on the floor, face down, with his own handcuffs securing his wrists behind his back, and Amy's knee placed firmly between his shoulder blades. Officer Rodriguez quickly took charge of the now restrained Curtis, formally arresting him for assault, unlawful possession of a concealed firearm, and making criminal threats. As Curtis was escorted away, still yelling profanities, Robert made a frantic attempt to escape, only to be met by Marcus Reed, who was holding up his identification. "Robert Thompson. I am Special Agent Marcus Reed of the FBI. I need to ask you some questions about the financial irregularities in the Lakeside Pines Homeowners Association records, specifically the offshore payments from what appear to be legitimate vendor transactions." As Robert was led away for questioning, the assembled residents sat in a state of stunned silence for a few moments before breaking out into a flurry of discussion. Jessica promptly assumed control of the meeting, her legal expertise proving invaluable as she calmed the residents and set up a temporary leadership committee to oversee HOA matters until proper elections could be organized. Sarah Thompson, left by her husband and suddenly confronting the ruin of her social position, ran from the room in tears. David, looking both scared and relieved, willingly handed over all financial documents to Officer Rodriguez, evidently seeking leniency by cooperating. When the commotion subsided and the community center slowly cleared out, Amy and I walked home in the pleasant evening air, a peculiar sense of calm settling over us. Was all of this really necessary? I inquired, genuinely interested in her methods. Couldn't we have simply filed a report on Curtis for threatening with a weapon that first night and been finished with it? Amy thought about the question for a moment before replying. We could have, but that would have only dealt with a symptom, not the underlying problem. What was occurring in Lakeside Pines wasn't just about a single rogue security guard. It was about a systemic misuse of power that impacted everyone. She smiled faintly. Besides, I am trained to see the broader context. One problematic security guard is a matter for the police. A coordinated effort to swindle homeowners while using intimidation to silence dissent, that is something that needs to be properly dismantled. As we got to our house, a reporter who had trailed us from the meeting called out for a comment. "Who are you exactly, Ms. Johnson?" she asked, her notebook ready. Amy just smiled. "I'm just a homeowner who is aware of her rights," she answered, before leading me inside and shutting the door on the start of what would surely become a Lakeside Pines legend. 3 months went by, bringing significant transformations to Lakeside Pines. The criminal inquiries moved forward with systematic precision, leading to numerous charges against Robert for embezzlement, fraud, and financial wrongdoing. Curtis was confronted with a separate list of charges, including illegal firearm possession, assault, property destruction, and harassment. The local newspaper's report on the HOA corruption scandal was syndicated by larger news organizations, casting an unwelcome light on the former leadership, but ultimately bringing valuable transparency to the community. Sarah Thompson, burdened with increasing legal costs and the ruin of her social life, discreetly put her house on the market and relocated to live with her sister in another state. David Clark, the treasurer who had facilitated the financial misconduct, cooperated extensively with the authorities in return for lighter charges, offering detailed accounts of how Robert had manipulated the HOA's finances for years. The security firm was dissolved and succeeded by a reputable company with properly licensed staff who recognized the limits of their authority. The most significant transformation, however, was within the community itself. Jessica Miller was chosen as the new HOA president, with Linda Peterson as her vice president. Their initial actions involved updating the bylaws to guarantee transparency, creating fair enforcement methods, and lowering the excessive fees that had financed the previous administration's self-indulgence. Community gatherings became truly welcoming instead of chances to reinforce social pecking orders, and neighbors who once steered clear of each other now paused to converse while walking their dogs or getting their mail. One evening, as Amy and I were on our porch watching the sunset before she left for a new assignment, Sarah Thompson made an unexpected appearance at our gate. She appeared markedly changed. Her high-end attire was gone, replaced by simple jeans, and her previously immaculate look now bore the marks of stress. "May I have a word with you?" she asked timidly. I looked at Amy, who gave a slight nod, and I invited Sarah to sit with us. She turned down the offered seat, remaining awkwardly on her feet as she tried to form her words. "I needed to say I'm sorry before I go for good," she finally managed. "I was aware of some of what Robert was up to. Not everything, but enough that I should have intervened. I persuaded myself that it wasn't causing any harm, that it was just the way things were done." Amy looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "Why did you go along with it, Sarah? You had to know it was unethical." Sarah's composure began to fray. "You need to realize, my whole sense of self was tied to being Mrs. Robert Thompson, the matriarch of Lakeside Pines. I was a nobody before I married him, just a receptionist from a small town. The social standing, the admiration, the jealousy from other women. I got hooked on it." She glanced at her unpolished nails. "Now I'm starting from scratch at 55 with just alimony and a lot of remorse." I felt an unexpected wave of empathy for her, seeing the common human yearning for importance that had taken her down such a ruinous road. After Sarah had gone, Amy and I decided to throw a spontaneous barbecue, inviting the neighbors who had supported us and others who just wanted to be part of the community's new beginning. As evening fell and conversations flowed easily across my once policed lawn, Jessica took me aside. "Your daughter is extraordinary," she remarked, observing Amy as she conversed effortlessly with a group of residents. "I've learned more about leadership by watching her these past few months than in my whole professional life. She never wanted recognition or authority, only justice and good order. The community is going to miss her." I nodded, experiencing the familiar blend of pride and sadness that came with having a daughter whose remarkable skills meant she was frequently called to where she was most needed. Later that night, After our company had left and the house was still, Amy and I sat on the porch steps with glasses of bourbon, savoring our final evening together before her early morning departure. "I've been thinking about what you accomplished here," I said to her, the alcohol making me less reserved than usual. "You could have dealt with Curtis on your own that first night and been finished with it. Instead, you engineered a complete community overhaul. What was your reasoning?" Amy looked at her glass thoughtfully before responding. "Growing up and seeing you at work, I learned that real diplomacy isn't about sidestepping conflict. It's about reshaping it into something productive. Curtis aiming a gun at me was just a sign of a dysfunctional system. Getting rid of him alone wouldn't have fixed anything." She looked out at the tranquil neighborhood, where porch lights glimmered like stars on the ground. "The plan wasn't about getting even, Dad. It was about rebuilding. Communities like this one ought to be places where people support one another, not live in fear of one another." I finally grasped what had driven her patient and deliberate strategy. It wasn't just her tactical commander instincts that had reacted to the danger, but also her community-building spirit, a trait I hadn't fully recognized until that moment. "I've dedicated my career to neutralizing dangers," she went on quietly. "But there is a special kind of fulfillment in creating something better from the wreckage." As the sun rose the next morning and I got ready to take Amy to the airport, we found a collection of thank you notes from our neighbors, many of whom we hardly knew 3 months before. "Will you be okay here by yourself?" Amy inquired as we put her bags in the car. "What if another security guard tries to flex his authority?" I laughed, feeling more at ease in Lakeside Pines than I had since I first arrived. "I believe I can handle it. Your old dad still has a few diplomatic moves he can make." As we departed, I looked in the rearview mirror at the house that had gone from being a place of contention to a real home, and further to the community that had rediscovered its strength. "You know," Amy remarked thoughtfully as we got closer to the airport, "there's a principle I've adopted over my years in tactical command. Sometimes you don't have to use a weapon to secure a victory. Sometimes, figuring out your adversary's strategy and using it to your own benefit is the most significant triumph of all." She grinned at me, the morning sun highlighting her features. "And sometimes, the most tranquil communities are the ones that have endured the most difficult trials." Since that time, whenever an HOA in Lakeside Pines or elsewhere thinks about exceeding its authority, the tale of the FBI commander's daughter and her diplomat father is frequently remembered as a warning. Not all heroes wear capes. Sometimes, they are just people who know their rights and will not be pushed around. And maybe the most crucial lesson is to never aim a gun at someone without knowing who they are, particularly if that person is an FBI tactical commander with a talent for strategic planning and a strong dedication to justice.